Nobody moved. 50 people in a downtown Chicago cafe. Suits. Laptops. Morning coffee going cold. Not one of them made a sound. The man on the floor was still screaming. Expensive suit. Shattered shoulder. 3 seconds ago he had been the loudest person in the room. Now he was on his knees in spilled coffee and broken porcelain, staring up at the man standing over him like he was seeing something that shouldn't exist outside of a classified file. The man standing wasn't breathing hard. That was the thing nobody could process. No rage. No adrenaline. Just still. Completely. Terrifyingly still. Like the violence had cost him nothing. Like 3 men going down in 4 seconds was just a Tuesday. 2 of those men were already on the floor behind him. Nobody had seen them fall. It had happened too fast for the human eye to follow. Outside, sirens. Getting closer. In the corner booth, a woman in a beige trench coat set down her coffee cup. Slowly, deliberately. Like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. She stood up, and the whole room held its breath. Because whatever came next, nobody in that cafe was ready for it. The rain came in sideways that morning. Not the gentle kind. Not the kind that softens the edges of buildings and makes Chicago look like something worth painting. The kind that hits glass like it has a specific grievance. The kind that soaks through a jacket before you've made it half a block and makes you question the particular chain of decisions that led you to standing outside a coffee shop at 8 in the morning. With a 6-year-old who lost her front tooth last night and wants a blueberry muffin. That's how it started. Not with a mission, not with a threat assessment or a radio call or the low specific tension of a room where something bad was about to happen. With a blueberry muffin and a gap-toothed smile, and a little girl named Zoe, who pressed her face to the rain-streaked glass of the roasted bean and said, "That one, Daddy." The biggest one, Malcolm Hayes said yes, because of course he did. The roasted bean occupied the corner of Michigan and Wacker, wedged between a bank lobby with revolving doors and a parking structure that charged $40 a day without apology. It was the kind of place that charged $14 for an espresso and wrote the roast origin on a small chalkboard above the counter in careful handwriting. Cold brew on nitro. Oat milk from a brand Malcolm had never heard of. The word artisan, used without irony, by people who meant it. He'd walked past it 100 times on the way to job sites. Never gone in, Zoe had pressed her face to the window 3 Tuesdays in a row. This Tuesday was different. Her front tooth had come out overnight. She'd woken him at 2 in the morning, padding into his room in yellow pajamas, holding the tooth in her open palm like she'd found something that required a witness. "Daddy." It happened, voice just above a whisper. Eyes wide the way they went when something crossed from anticipated to real. He'd sat up, looked at the small white tooth in her small brown hand, and felt something open in his chest. Not pain, not grief, something that didn't have a clean name. The specific fullness of a moment that knew it was temporary and didn't care. So blueberry muffin, biggest one. Tuesday morning, Malcolm pushed open the door. Warmth first. Espresso, and something with cinnamon in it, and the low sound of acoustic guitar from speakers he couldn't locate. The place was half full in the way that expensive places were half full during rush hour. Suits at the counter. 2 college students with laptops in the corner. A woman near the window turned away from the room, talking into her phone. The kind of Tuesday crowd that ran on caffeine and deadline pressure and didn't look up when the door opened. Malcolm looked up. Always. Not a choice anymore. Hadn't been a choice in a long time. 13 years of walking into rooms where the door opening meant something had trained it into him below the level of conscious decision. He scanned left to right without hurrying. 4 exits. 2 positions where the sight line narrowed. 1 column near the back that would give anyone standing behind it full cover and a view of the entrance. He noted it, filed it, moved on. Then he picked the booth in the far left corner. Back to the wall, right side free, clear view of the entrance and the counter both. Zoe had already found the display case. "Can I go look?" "Stay where I can see you," she went. He watched. The booth was clean, wood-topped, 1 corner slightly worn from years of elbows. Malcolm hung his jacket on the hook, slid in with his right side toward the room, and put both hands flat on the table. Not a conscious decision either, just the way he sat. The way he'd always sat in every room for 13 years, even now that there was nothing in this particular room that required it. Old habits didn't die. They just waited. Zoe came back dragging a laminated menu, nearly as tall as she was. They have hot chocolate with marshmallows shaped like stars. That what you want? She thought about it with the seriousness the question deserved, which was considerable. Muffin first. Then we'll see about the stars. Malcolm flagged the server. Young, kind eyes, a small nose ring. The kind of person who chose this job because she actually liked people. And ordered. 1 blueberry muffin, 1 small hot chocolate, 1 black coffee, no room. Zoe showed the server the gap in her front teeth. Unprompted. Just offered it up, chin tilted, like she was presenting credentials. The server said it was the best thing she'd seen all week, and she meant it. Malcolm watched the exchange and felt something settle. Zoe had her mother's way with strangers. That quality of just opening. Of not carrying armor into every interaction the way Malcolm had spent a decade learning to carry it. He used to worry about it. The openness. The trust. Now it mostly just amazed him that it had survived everything that had tried to close it. He looked at his daughter across the table and made the quiet daily note he made without meaning to. Don't let this moment get smaller than it is. This exact thing. Tuesday morning, blueberry muffin. Gap-toothed smile. The simple fact of being here, the coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around it. And that was when he noticed the woman in the corner booth. Not because she was looking at him. Because she wasn't looking at anyone. Or that's what it would seem like to most people in the room. Malcolm had spent enough years being the person who wasn't looking at anyone to read the difference between vacancy and method. Her shoulders were down and easy. Her gaze was aimed at a point just past her laptop screen. She lifted her coffee cup without looking at it. Her phone sat face down on the table beside the closed laptop. Every 30 seconds her attention moved. Counter to door, door to window, window to the back corridor. Not anxious, not twitchy, systematic. She wore a beige trench coat over a dark turtleneck, the kind of clothes that cost real money and were chosen specifically not to announce it. Hair pulled back, clean. She had the look of a woman who had made a deliberate decision to be unremarkable today, which told Malcolm she was usually remarkable and knew exactly what that cost her. He looked away before she caught him looking. Blueberries first, he said, sliding the napkin across to Zoe. You always say that. Because it's always correct. Zoe pulled a single blueberry from the top of the muffin and held it up, examining it like evidence. They don't actually make you smarter, my teacher said. Your teacher also considers glitter glue a legitimate artistic medium. Zoe giggled. Short, bright, the kind of sound that cut straight through ambient noise and made the server at the counter smile without looking up. The tightness in Malcolm's jaw, the 3-hour sleep, the 2 in the morning start. None of it disappeared exactly, but it moved to the edge of things where it belonged. He drank his coffee. She worked through the muffin methodically, saving the blueberries for last, despite everything she'd said. They talked about nothing in particular. The loose brick on the sidewalk outside their building. Whether different kinds of clouds had different names, what it would feel like to be a bird in this specific rain. The kind of conversation that had no destination and was better for it. For 17 minutes, it was a good morning. Then the door opened. Not the way doors usually opened. Like a statement. Like someone who needed every entrance to carry the full weight of their own importance and had practiced making that happen without noticing they'd practiced it. Donald Thomas walked in like the room had been expecting him. He was 41 and had the look of a man who'd been told he was exceptional. For so long he'd stopped holding it up to the light. The suit was dark charcoal, custom fitted, the kind of cut that required 3 appointments and cost what Malcolm made in a month of contract work. The watch moved on his wrist when he gestured. The Bluetooth device was already in his ear, already mid-call, already receiving someone's anxiety and converting it into instruction. I don't care what compliance says. Voice projecting clean across the café without any apparent effort, as though the concept of shared space hadn't registered yet. Dump the position before the market opens. Handle the questions after. That's not your problem, it's mine, and I'm telling you to do it. A woman at the counter glanced over. The barista kept her head down. The college students looked at each other with the shared expression of people watching something they knew better than to comment on. Malcolm clocked him, filed him, went back to watching Zoe rescue a blueberry from a fold in the muffin paper. Donald moved to the counter, still talking, still loud. He ordered without looking at the menu, without pausing his call, without the micro-acknowledgement that most people extended to the person taking their order, that small nod that said, "I see you, you're a person." This transaction involves two human beings. The barista wrote his order on the cup. Donald had already turned away. Zoe had stopped eating. She was watching Donald the way children watched things that felt wrong before they had language for why. Still alert. The way animals went quiet before weather shifted. Eyes here. Malcolm touched the edge of the table. She looked back at him. "Eat your muffin." She did. He kept Donald in the edge of his vision. The order came up. Large caramel macchiato, extra syrup, grabbed off the counter without acknowledgement or eye contact. The cup already in his right hand as he pivoted to continue his circuit of the small space near the pickup counter. Still talking. Still gesturing with his left hand, the Bluetooth cord swaying. 3 steps. 4. He wasn't watching where he was going because he had never developed the habit of watching where he was going, because nothing in his experience had yet required it. The corner of the table caught his hip. The forward momentum did the rest. The cup left his right hand. Not thrown. Simply released by the physics of what happens when a moving body meets an immovable surface. Malcolm was already out of his seat and rotating left, his hand reaching across the table. Too slow. The cup hit the table edge first. The lid gave. 12 ounces of hot caramel coffee spread across the table surface in under 2 seconds, rolling towards Zoe, swallowing the coloring book she'd been working in since they sat down, spilling over the edge. Zoe pulled her hands back, made a sound. Small and sharp, the sound of surprise that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to become something worse. Malcolm had her. Both hands checking. Fingers, palms, the inside of her wrists, her face. Zoe. "Look at me. Did it burn you? Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice came out thin. She was looking at the coloring book, at the picture she'd been working on since they sat down. A house, yellow, with a lopsided sun in the upper corner. 3 figures in front of it. Tall one, small one in a red dress, which meant it was her mother. My picture. The pages had begun to curl at the edges, the colors bleeding into each other. Malcolm sat her back in her seat, reached for napkins, began doing what needed doing, clearing the mess before it made things worse. With the systematic calm of someone who'd learned that panic was a luxury, and efficiency was the only thing that actually helped. He was steady. Not because nothing was wrong, because he'd decided how to carry it. He hadn't looked at Donald yet. Donald was looking at his shoes, 1 drop, maybe 2, caught on the left toe of a pair of Oxford dress shoes that had probably never touched anything messier than a rain-damp sidewalk. His expression moved through several things quickly. Surprise, then the specific irritation of someone unused to things going wrong, then something that settled into blame like a man finding a comfortable chair. "Are you serious right now?" Not a question. His voice had dropped from the corporate broadcast register into something more personal and more mean. "You had your chair halfway into the aisle. I could have broken my wrist." The cafe had gone quiet. Not all at once. In the staged way that sound left a room when people decided to pay attention. The espresso machine between cycles. The barista with her hand resting on the counter. The college student's keyboard suddenly still. Malcolm set down the napkins. Looked up. Donald was staring at him with the expression of a man who'd found someone to assign the problem to and was relieved about it. He looked at Malcolm the way people looked when they were reading A Room for Hierarchy. The flannel shirt, the worn denim, the work boots with old mud dried into the welt seams, and arrived at a conclusion that settled visibly in his posture. "I'm sorry about the mess." Malcolm kept his voice level and clean, the voice he'd used in tight rooms when the temperature was rising, and the people with the most authority had the least information. "But you walked into our table. My daughter was almost burned. Let's slow down." Donald blinked, then laughed. The kind of laugh that didn't find anything funny. "Slow down." He looked at Malcolm again, taking in the whole picture now. Do you know what it costs to sit at a table in here? Do you have any concept? He said it to the room as much as to Malcolm. Already performing, already building the audience he needed. Look what you're wearing. You walked in here looking like you came off a job site and you're going to tell me to slow down? No one moved. The server had both hands on the counter and wasn't pretending to do anything else. Malcolm stood up. He didn't move fast. He didn't need to. He was 6'1", and built the way men got built when fitness had always been functional rather than aesthetic. Weight distributed through the shoulders and chest, the kind of frame that a well-fitted jacket would have made obvious, and that the flannel mostly absorbed. He stood up and positioned himself between Zoe and Donald in a way that appeared incidental. "We're going to leave," he said. "I'll clean up the table first. You have a good morning." He turned, reached for his jacket, reached for Zoe's hand. "I didn't say we were finished." The words landed flat in the quiet room. Malcolm stopped. He took one breath. 4 counts in, chest expanding slow, hold, 4 counts out. The technique from a windowless room at Fort Bragg, taught by an instructor who explained, without drama, that the only real difference between a professional and someone who thought they were one was the half-second between what happened to you and what you decided to do about it. That half-second was everything. That half-second was the whole job. He used it. Then he turned around. Donald had moved a step closer. Not close enough to be within reach, but close enough to be making a point about who had the right to occupy this space. "You're not leaving until you figure out what my dry cleaning sus and how you're going to cover it. I'm going to write down what this suit is worth, and you're going to explain to me how someone like you covers that. And then we're going to have an honest conversation about whether you belong in places like this." Someone like you, the phrase settled into the room the way certain phrases did. Not loud, but heavy, the kind that changed the temperature of a space simply by being spoken. Malcolm heard Zoe's chair shift behind him. She was 6 years old. She didn't have the full vocabulary for what was happening, but she had the shape of it. Children always had the shape of it. "Someone like me," Malcolm said quietly. Not back at him, just held it up, looked at it. "You heard me." Donald had his phone out now, scrolling, already in the mode of a man who resolved situations by making them cost the other person something measurable. "I have attorneys on retainer who charge more per hour than you make in a week. So let's skip the part where you act like you have options here and get to the part where we sort this out." The door chimed. 2 men came in together, Gary Young and Terry Coleman. Both large, both suited to match Donald's register, both reading the room in under 3 seconds and landing on the same conclusion. Gary was broader, the residue of college football that had softened at the edges, but not entirely. Terry was quicker in his eyes, the kind of quick that came from paying attention to rooms for reasons other than conversation. They crossed the floor and flanked Donald, without being asked, the choreography of men who'd done it before. "Everything good?" Gary directed this at Donald, not Malcolm. Not yet. Donald's confidence, already considerable, expanded with the addition of bodies. "Our friend here doesn't want to take responsibility for the mess he caused." Terry looked at Malcolm, took inventory the same way Donald had. The boots, the jacket, the absence of a tie or a badge or anything that announced a category Terry needed to take seriously. His shoulders came down a degree, which was a mistake. Malcolm felt Zoe's hand find the hem of his jacket. He reached back without looking and found her fingers and held them once. "Steady, there, here." Then released. "We're leaving now." He said it to the room, to no one specifically. "This is done. It's done when I say it's done." Donald stepped left, cutting the angle to the exit. Gary moved right without instruction, filling the other side. Terry held position behind. 3-1 with a child at Malcolm's left, and it might have been enough. For most people. For someone without the particular history Malcolm carried. For someone who hadn't spent 13 years learning the geometry of rooms where bodies became obstacles and exits became the only math that mattered. But Malcolm didn't process threat the way people did when they weren't trained for it. He didn't accelerate when pressure built. He slowed down, got more specific. The room resolved into components, 3 positions, weight distribution, distance to door, the child at his left side, who could not be moved quickly enough through any of the available angles. He ran the options in the time it took most people to blink. He was still hoping this would stop. Still choosing, with everything he had, to give it one more chance to stop, one more time. His voice dropped. Not anger, the thing that lived underneath anger when anger had been left behind as too expensive. Step aside, Donald spread his arms, playing to the room now, to the audience he'd confirmed was watching. Or what? You're going to do something right here with your kid standing there? Go ahead, chin up. The full posture of someone who had never once lost something he'd gambled. I have attorneys who will take whatever's in your bank account. And I will personally make sure that little girl ends up somewhere you can't get to her. The cafe absorbed that. Every person in it absorbed that. In the corner booth, the woman in the beige trench coat set down her cup. Not quickly. Deliberately, as though she'd been waiting to see if someone else would act first, and had now finished waiting. The threat arrived in Malcolm the way real threats arrived. Not in the chest or the gut, but lower and older than either of those. In the part that kept inventory of everything it stood to lose. Zoe, 6 years old, gap in her front teeth, brand new. Red rain boots she wore every single day because of the sound they made on wet pavement. The smell of her hair in the morning, something like warm bread and sleep. The way she said his name when she was half awake, not daddy, just a sound that meant safe. He looked at her. She was looking back at him. Steady for someone so small, not crying. Watching his face the way she'd always watched it. Reading it the way she'd learned to read it, before she had words for the language. He turned back to Donald. Zoe. His voice stayed easy, the way he kept it easy on purpose. Close your eyes and count to 10 for me. Like we practice, she didn't ask why. 1. Something left Malcolm's face, not dramatically, not with a change in posture or a shift in breathing. Something subtracted. Everything that had been in his eyes for the previous 20 minutes, the tiredness, the warmth, the patience of a man eating breakfast with his daughter on a Tuesday morning, gone. What replaced it had no temperature at all. The staff had seen arguments in this cafe. The friction of the financial district at full pressure first thing in the morning. The spillage of bad days onto strangers. They had not seen whatever they were looking at now, and several of them would think about it for days afterward, without being able to fully describe it. Donald shoved him, both hands, right shoulder, hard. The shove of someone who had done this to other people before and had always gotten the outcome he expected from it. Malcolm's right hand came up, and it wasn't a punch. Wasn't a grab either, it was a lock. Thumb finding the specific gap above the radial nerve at Donald's wrist, and he stepped in and rotated down with his full body weight, behind a motion that required almost no force once the angle was right, and Donald's shoulder gave with the sound of something that had been pushed past what it was built to withstand. Donald didn't scream immediately. The shock took the sound from him first. 2. He went to one knee, face going the color of old concrete, the arm dropping to a wrong angle. Gary was already in motion, big man, long reach, right hand cocked for something heavy aimed at Malcolm's jaw. Malcolm moved left, just enough, inside the arc, and brought his right forearm down onto the junction of Gary's neck and shoulder. Not a punch, more like a weight finding a specific groove, and Gary's legs cut out beneath him. He went face first and didn't move. 3. Terry had his hand in his coat. Stainless steel water bottle, the kind you could break a nose with. Malcolm closed the distance before the swing completed. Heel of his open right hand, upward, under Terry's chin. The sound was sharp and specific. Terry's jaw closed hard. His eyes lost the room. Malcolm's right leg went behind Terry's knee and he guided him down. Not a throw, a controlled placement. And Terry went to the floor on his side and stayed there, breathing in small, careful increments. 4. 5. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Malcolm stood in the center of what remained. Right arm at his side, loose. Left hand resting lightly on Zoe's shoulder. His breathing had not changed. His heart rate had climbed 20% at most. Operational range, the numbers his body knew how to work within. Donald found his voice. It came out wrong, the pitch of a man who'd run a calculation and gotten a result he didn't have a framework for. You broke your shoulder is dislocated, even. Clinical, the same tone he would have used reading coordinates, not broken. The pain will peak in about 90 seconds when the shock clears. Don't rotate the arm. You'll tear the rotator cuff. Stay still. The flatness of it frightened Donald more than the injury had. He stared up from the floor, the expensive suit now wearing spilled coffee and fragments of broken ceramic, and everything that had animated his face for the past 10 minutes. The contempt, the performance, the absolute certainty of his own position, had drained out completely. What was left underneath it was just a man on the floor, afraid. 6 sirens, outside 2 sets. Getting closer. The cafe manager, Malcolm, had noted him earlier. 50s, the look of a man who had protocols for everything until the moment when he needed them, had hit something under the counter at some point in the last 30 seconds. Malcolm heard the sirens and ran the only calculation that mattered. He was standing over 3 men in expensive suits on the floor of an upscale cafe in the financial district. He was wearing work boots and a flannel shirt with a coffee stain on the cuff from this morning. He had no badge, no card, no institutional affiliation of any kind. He had a 6-year-old daughter and a lease on an apartment in Pilsen with a cracked windowsill and a service record that didn't exist in any database a responding officer could pull up in the time it took squad cars to reach the curb. He knew what the story looked like. Before a single word was spoken, he put his hand gently on Zoe's shoulder and looked at the exit to the back corridor. Thought about the alley. Thought about 30 seconds of clean movement, and then both of them absorbed into the side streets before anyone had a description. He could do it. He knew exactly how to do it. Then he looked at Zoe, eyes still closed, still counting. Trusting him in the complete and uncomplicated way. She always had, the way he'd spent 2 years trying to be worthy of one day at a time. He couldn't put her through a street-level disappearing act, couldn't make her part of a story that started with running. He stood still, 7, 8, red and blue strobed across the front windows, tires on wet pavement outside. The door came open hard, and 4 officers moved in with the practiced energy of people who'd trained for rooms that weren't what they expected. Hands finding holsters, voices establishing control. Nobody move, hands visible. Who called it in? And then a voice came from the corner of the room, and everything stopped moving. Calm. Unhurried. The voice of someone who had been the most important person in too many rooms to need to announce it anymore, and had simply decided to be the most important person in this one. This man isn't going anywhere. Every head in the room turned. The woman in the beige trench coat was on her feet. She'd opened the coat, and what was under it? A dark structured jacket, charcoal turtleneck, the precise fit of clothes made with intention, changed the shape of the room the moment it was visible. She wasn't particularly tall. She didn't need to be. She walked from her corner booth at the pace of someone who had never needed to hurry to be taken seriously, and she came to the center of the room and stopped, and the 4 officers actually paused. That meant something. Malcolm watched her reach into the inside breast pocket of her jacket and withdraw a card holder. Slim, black leather, the kind that opened to show something specific rather than something general. She held it open toward the officer in front, the one with the most experience in his face. 50s, gray at the temples, the particular steadiness of someone who had been reading situations for 20 years and had learned to trust what he read. My name is Vanessa Carter. Cole Capital Group. She let the name land, let it do its work. Then, I've been in this booth since 7:45 this morning. I witnessed this entire situation from the beginning. She turned. Not for effect, just to point. Toward Donald, who was still on the floor, face gray, cradling his arm. That man and his 2 associates physically blocked this man's path to the exit, made contact first, and threatened to have his child removed from his custody. She looked back at the lead officer. I have the full sequence on my private security feed. The lead officer looked at Donald. Looked at Gary, still down. Looked at Terry, sitting up now but not attempting to stand. Looked at Malcolm. Malcolm looked back, hands visible, breathing even. The officer's jaw shifted slightly. He turned to the woman. Miss Carter, careful voice. Precise. Can you walk me through what you observed? I can. She did. 2 minutes. No embellishment, no emotional coloring. The sequence, as it had happened. The collision, Donald's refusal to acknowledge it, the escalation, blocking of the exit, the threat about Zoe, The moment Donald's hands made contact with Malcolm's shoulder, she gave it in order. She stated it as what she had seen. She didn't say Malcolm worked for her. She didn't say anything that wasn't true. She just said the true things in an order, and with a clarity that made them impossible to argue with. Detective Raymond Harris. Malcolm caught the name off the badge when the man shifted, listened, asked 2 specific follow-up questions, and then turned and looked at Donald, who made one more attempt from the floor. She's lying. She doesn't know him. She came in after. I've been in this booth since 7:45. Vanessa didn't raise her voice. The cafe's security system will confirm that timestamp. Along with everything else, Donald's mouth closed. Harris holstered his weapon and gestured to the others. He looked at the room, the overturned coffee, the broken cup, the 3 men on the floor in various conditions, and made the kind of decision that experienced people made when they'd accounted for all the variables and selected the one they could defend in a report. He crossed to Donald and got him upright with a grip on his uninjured arm, and Donald's sound of pain was involuntary and high and startled the birds on the windowsill ledge. Outside. You have the right to remain silent, Harris said. My strong suggestion is that you use it. Ambulances were called. Gary had a probable concussion and wasn't fully responsive. Terry had a dislocated jaw and was breathing in a way that would need to be evaluated. Donald's shoulder required reduction at a minimum. Chicago PD began the documentation process. The cafe manager found his voice and started talking to one of the younger officers. Someone in the back had already started mopping. Vanessa walked to where Malcolm stood with Zoe. Zoe had both eyes open. She looked at the men on the floor, with the expression of someone encountering a category of experience that didn't yet have a place in her existing understanding of how mornings worked. 9, 10. She'd finished the count before it ended. She looked up at Malcolm. Did something happen? He crouched down to her level, picked up her jacket from the booth seat. Some people needed to work something out. It's handled. Are you okay? She considered the room one more time, seriously, without rushing. My picture got ruined, I know. Can we get another coloring book? Yeah. Bug. We can get another coloring book, he straightened, turned to face Vanessa Carter. She was watching him with the focused, unperformative attention of someone completing a thought that started 20 minutes earlier, when they first noticed how a man in a flannel shirt chose his seat in a room. My car is in the loading zone around back. Quiet, not an instruction. Something more careful than that. The press monitors police radio frequencies. They'll have cameras here in under 2 minutes. If you want to keep her out of the frame, you need to come with me now. Malcolm looked at her. Looked at her the way he'd learned to look at people. Not at what was presented, but at what held it up. The way she'd stood. The precise, unembellished account she'd given to 4 police officers without being asked. The way she'd walked to the center of a volatile room with the same pace she would have used to cross a lobby. He looked at Zoe. She was pulling her jacket on and watching Vanessa with the direct, unguarded curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned that looking at strangers was supposed to be complicated. Are we going somewhere? She asked Vanessa directly. Not Malcolm. Vanessa looked at her. Something moved behind her expression. Brief, genuine, the kind of thing that didn't show up in boardrooms. If your dad says yes. Zoe turned to Malcolm. He had been trained, in specific and repeated terms, not to follow unknown parties to secondary locations. Never. Under any circumstances. 13 years of that training. It didn't turn off. It was never designed to turn off. But he understood, with the same clarity that made him good at what he'd done. The difference between a threat and an offer. Vanessa Carter had just stood in front of 4 police officers and given 2 minutes of precise, unembellished truth on behalf of a man she'd never met. She'd done it without being asked, without hesitation, without looking to Malcolm for confirmation of a single detail. You didn't do that without a reason. He wanted to know what the reason was. He picked up Zoe's hand. Yeah, he said. Okay, they went out the back. The alley was cold. The rain still coming down in the same relentless sideways sheets. And the car was exactly where she'd said it would be. Black SUV, engine running. A driver who didn't turn around when they got in. The doors closed with the solid hermetic sound of serious engineering. and the noise of the sirens and the gathering voices on the sidewalk out front cut off completely. Replaced by quiet. The specific quiet of a vehicle that cost enough to make the world outside a gauge negotiable. Zoe looked at the interior. Cream leather. Ambient lighting set low. A neat row of chilled water bottles in the center console. She reached out with 2 fingers and touched the seat beside her, very carefully, as if checking whether it was real. Daddy, barely above a whisper. Are we in a spaceship? Malcolm put his arm around her and felt the car begin to move, and for the first time since 8:15, he let his body do the thing it had been refusing to do, exhale. Not completely, not all the way down, but enough. He didn't know who this woman was, not in any way that counted. He didn't know what she'd seen in a corner booth that made her stand up and walk into the middle of something that had nothing to do with her. He didn't know what was about to be asked of him, offered to him, or taken from him. But she had said true things in front of 4 police officers, when she could have sat in her booth and waited for it to be over. And Zoe was safe, for right now, that was the only math he needed. Vanessa Carter sat across from them, her coat open, a tablet already in her hands. The morning was continuing for her the way it apparently continued for people who operated at her level. Without disruption, without the need for recovery time, moving directly from one thing to the next, without requiring the space that most people needed between significant events. She hadn't fixed her hair or checked her jacket, or shown any of the physiological tells of someone who'd just been in a room where violence happened, which told Malcolm something about her history with high-pressure rooms. He filed it. She looked up from the tablet, met his eyes, held them. Malcolm Hayes, she said. Not a question, not a greeting. His name placed between them like something she'd already decided to keep. 38 years old, 13 years in a unit that doesn't appear anywhere in the public record. 2 years out. Currently contracting residential construction in the greater Chicago area. He let a beat sit. You got that from a Café camera. I got your face from the camera feed. Something moved through her voice. Not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. The rest took 4 minutes. DMV registration. A contractor license filed with Cook County. An article in the Tribune from 14 months ago about a man who pulled 2 children out of a burning car on Lakeshore Drive before the fire department arrived. A pause. You left before the reporter got there. I left before the photographer got there. I know. The witness accounts were enough. She looked at him with the same quality of attention she'd used in the café. Direct, precise, not unkind. Your military record is a wall of redactions. I didn't get past that. I didn't try. Malcolm studied her. Most people don't spend 4 minutes researching a stranger they helped out of a bad morning. Most people weren't watching that stranger for 20 minutes before the bad morning started. The honesty of that landed without softening. No spin. She'd been watching him. She was telling him she'd been watching him. People with something to conceal didn't lead with the thing they were concealing. Why? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. Because of how you sat down? He waited. You scanned the room when you came in. You took the seat with your back to the wall and your right side free. Your hands stayed on the table the entire time. Not on your phone, not in your pockets. You were present in a way that people with your kind of background tend to perform, without being able to stop performing it. She picked up her coffee. You weren't performing anything. You were eating breakfast with your daughter. Malcolm was quiet, and then Donald Thomas walked into your table, she continued, and I watched you make the choice not to respond 3 separate times. Each time you had every reason to. Each time you chose not to. She set the cup down, and then he touched you, and it took 4 seconds, and you stopped the moment the threat was gone. She looked at him steadily. That kind of restraint doesn't come from temperament. It's trained, and it costs something. I wanted to understand what it cost you. The car stopped at a light. Rain on the roof, barely audible through the insulation. What do you want? Malcolm asked. No buffer. No approach. She didn't move away from it. I need someone to run my personal security who actually understands what security means. Not what it looks like from the outside. Not someone whose job is to stand behind me and appear capable. She glanced at Zoe, who had fallen asleep against Malcolm's arm at some point in the last 2 minutes, and then back at him. I need someone who identifies a threat before it develops, who makes decisions without waiting to be told, who can be in a room with 300 people who all want something from me and tell me, without a word, which one I need to be thinking about. I've been out 2 years. You dislocated a man's shoulder with a wrist lock this morning, and your heart rate didn't visibly change. That's not the same as protective detail work. It's the foundation of it. She shifted slightly forward. What you've lost in 2 years, current protocols, organizational structure, pace, those are buildable. What you have isn't. I've spent 11 years trying to hire it. I've put people through every training program that exists. A pause. In the last 6 months, I personally identified 3 security failures in my own detail before my team did. That's not a personnel problem. That's a structural one. And I can't solve it by hiring more polished versions of the same thing. Malcolm looked out the window. Pilsen moving past. His block coming up. He thought about the cracked windowsill he'd been meaning to fix for 4 months. The radiator that knocked at 3 a.m. the Tuesday money math. What came in, what went out, the gap that lived permanently between them. He thought about Zoe's coloring book, saturated and curling. 3 figures in a yellow house, tall one, small one in a red dress. He wasn't performing anything, she'd said that. He wondered what that looked like from the outside. After all this time, what does it pay? He asked. $380,000 a year. Full medical coverage, her included. No waiting period, no restrictions. Schedule built around her school calendar. You're home every evening unless there's a specific situation that requires otherwise, and those situations require 48 hours, notice minimum. She picked up the tablet. No international work. Everything I need protection from is here. The car stopped. His block, his building. The driver hadn't been told. She'd had the address before he got into the car. He looked at her. She looked back. Not pressing, not working the silence toward a particular outcome. Just waiting, with the ease of someone who knew how to afford patience. I need to think about it, he said. Take until Friday. He gathered Zoe. She stirred but didn't wake, resettled against his shoulder with the complete trust of the deeply asleep, and got out of the car. Stood on the wet sidewalk. Turned back once. Vanessa Carter was already looking at her tablet. The car pulled away. Malcolm stood in the rain with his daughter's weight against his chest, and thought about the fact that she hadn't pushed. Either she knew exactly what not pushing would do, or she didn't need to push because she'd already decided how this would go. He couldn't tell which was the more significant piece of information. He went inside. The apartment was what it had always been. 2 bedrooms, narrow kitchen, a bathroom where you had to remember which faucet ran hot. He put Zoe down in her bed still asleep, pulled the red boots off her feet, pulled the blanket up, stood in the doorway for a moment with his hand on the frame. Then he went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat at the table. The card from Vanessa was in his jacket pocket. He hadn't taken it out, didn't need to. He'd read the number when she handed it to him, and numbers were one of the things that stayed. 380,000. He'd cleared $68 an hour on his best contract this year, which was good money, which still didn't cover what it cost to raise a child alone in this city without a second income, and with health insurance that had a $2,000 deductible before it paid for anything. The windowsill across the kitchen had a crack in it that let cold air in all winter. He'd been meaning to fix it since October. He didn't call her that night. He didn't call Wednesday either. Wednesday he picked Zoe up from school and her teacher, Mrs. Patterson. Good teacher, the kind who remembered which kid needed which kind of encouragement and kept a different sticker drawer for each, stopped him at the door with a folder she'd clearly been waiting to show someone. Inside were 12 drawings Zoe had done over the past 3 months, arranged by date. The earliest ones were energetic and approximate. The recent ones had something different in them, a specific attention to proportion, to where shadow went, to how objects related to each other in space. She's developing real compositional instinct, Mrs. Patterson said, going through them carefully. This kind of spatial awareness isn't common at 6. There's a Saturday program at the Community Arts Center, drawing, some watercolor. 8 weeks, she looked at him with the careful expression of someone who had been in this conversation before. It's not free. $180 a month. He looked at the drawings. The yellow house with the 3 figures. Last week, a crayon rendering of the Chicago skyline that was more accurate than it had any business being from a 6-year-old who'd never had a lesson. He took the folder home. Set it on the kitchen table next to the spot where the card still wasn't. That night, Zoe asked him, while he was washing dishes and she was coloring at the table, "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see us?" He kept washing. "What made you think about that?" "I don't know." She was working on a new picture, this one, an animal he couldn't identify yet. "I think she can. I think she watches when something good happens." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Why something good?" he finally asked. She looked up, considered it with the seriousness she brought to real questions. "Because if I could watch, that's when I'd pick." He kept his back to her until his face was where he needed it to be. Thursday, he called Raymond Booker, Ray, the one person he'd kept regular contact with, from the unit, who'd gotten out 2 years before Malcolm and built a private security operation in Houston that was, from everything Malcolm could tell, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Ray picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call. "Took you long enough? I don't know what you mean. Michigan Avenue Café. 3 down in 4 seconds. Little girl counting in the background. A pause waited with restraint. "It's been running on social media since Tuesday night. The cafe posted it." Malcolm sat with that. "What's the response?" "Mixed, the way things always are. One woman is calling you a guardian angel. Someone else thinks it's staged." Ray's voice did the thing it did when he had more to say than he was deciding to say at once. "The girl counting is what got people. That's the clip everyone's sharing." He paused. "Someone offered you a job?" "Yes." "Executive protection?" "Yes. And you're calling me 3 days later instead of taking it because I can't figure out why she helped me." He stood up, moved to the window. The rain had finally stopped. First clear sky in 2 days, the kind of gray-blue that came after sustained weather. She didn't know me. She had no reason to walk into that. She could have watched from her booth and had a story for dinner parties. But she didn't. Ray was quiet a moment. Then, "Some people are actually like that, Malcolm. I've spent a long time in places where nobody was actually like that, I know. But you're not in those places anymore. You're in a coffee shop in Chicago. A woman watched something wrong happening and decided she was in a position to do something about it." A pause. "That's allowed to just be what it is." Malcolm looked at the sky going dark at the edges above the building line. "She knew my address before I told her," he said. "She knew it before I got in the car. She's a $9 billion private equity CEO who completed a hostile takeover of your assailant's employer the same morning." Ray's voice took on the particular tone of a man explaining something for the second time to someone who already knew it. "Finding your address took her 30 seconds. The fact that she used it to drop you off is actually the relevant piece of information." After he hung up, Malcolm sat at the kitchen table with the folder of Zoe's drawings open in front of him. The skyline, the house with 3 figures, and one from last month that he'd found when he went through her backpack. Just a sunrise, orange bleeding into pink, into pale yellow, that she'd done on a morning when he'd still been asleep, and she'd gotten up quietly and found the crayons on her own. He stared at it for a long time. Then he called the number. She picked up on the first ring. "Hayes, Monday," he said. "I need 2 days to sort out Zoe's schedule." A pause. Shorter than he'd expected. "Monday works." Another pause. "Thank you for calling." He set the phone down, sat with what he'd just done, thought, "I hope this is right." Then quieter. It already was. You just needed to catch up to it. Outside, Chicago went on being Chicago. Traffic and wind, and the low distant sound of the city working through its own complications. The cracked windowsill let in a thread of cold air from the west. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he got up, found the caulk in the cabinet under the sink, and started fixing it. It took 40 minutes and he had to redo one section twice, because he'd rushed it the first time. When he was done, he washed his hands, checked on Zoe. Still asleep, one arm thrown out to the side, utterly at peace. And stood in the hallway between her room and his own. Whatever came Monday, It would be different from what came before. That was the point. That was, he thought, exactly the point. Monday came the way significant things often did, without fanfare, just a date on a calendar that turned out to matter more than the days on either side of it. Malcolm was up at 5, not because of the alarm. The alarm was set for 5:30 and had been set for 5:30 for 2 years and had never once been the thing that woke him. He lay in the dark for a few minutes, listening to the building settle, listening to the specific quality of Zoe's silence from the next room, the settled, even silence of a child genuinely asleep versus the lighter silence of one about to wake. And then he got up and started the coffee and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The city outside was still mostly dark, a few lit windows across the way. A delivery truck making its first run on the block below, the driver moving with the practiced economy of someone who'd done this particular route so many times the decisions had stopped being decisions. Malcolm watched him and thought about economy of motion, about the difference between doing something because you'd been told to and doing it because you'd internalized the logic of it so completely that the logic and the action had become the same thing. He drank his coffee standing up. Zoe woke at 6:45, which was late for her, and came into the kitchen dragging her blanket with the expression of someone emerging from a particularly satisfying dream who wasn't entirely ready to leave it behind. She looked at Malcolm in his new suit, the old wedding suit, cleaned and pressed, sitting on him in the way that suits sat when they'd been bought for a different version of your body, and stopped. "You look different," she said. "Different good or different bad?" She tipped her head, assessing with the unself-conscious honesty of a 6-year-old. Different important. He made her oatmeal with brown sugar, packed her bag, walked her to the corner where the school bus stopped. She got on without looking back, which was new. 6 months ago, she'd turned at the top of the steps every time. He stood at the corner until the bus turned out of sight. Then he went to work. The building on Wacker was exactly the kind of building that knew what it was. 47 floors of glass and limestone, the kind of atrium lobby, where the ceiling height was a statement of intent and the security desk had more screens than most newsrooms. Malcolm arrived at 7:55, 5 minutes ahead of the time he'd been given, and stood in the lobby long enough to map it. Entry points, camera positions, the guard rotation at the desk, the elevator bank configuration. Brian Thompson met him at 7:58. Vanessa's executive assistant was perhaps 30, with the bearing of someone who had been born, understanding that their value to the organization was measured in problems that never reached the person above them. He looked at Malcolm's suit once, briefly, with an expression that was not unkind but was specific. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. If you'll follow me," Malcolm's office was on the 44th floor. Not large, but positioned correctly. Corner, 2 walls of glass, a sight line to the elevator bank and to the stairwell door. Either someone had thought about it or he'd gotten lucky. He suspected the former. There was a tailor there when he arrived. A man in his 60s who introduced himself as Leonard, shook Malcolm's hand without preamble, and began taking measurements with the brisk efficiency of someone who understood that his job was to make other people's mornings shorter, not longer. He said almost nothing. He needed to say almost nothing. Malcolm stood still and let it happen, and thought about how many rooms he'd stood in over the years where the thing being fitted to him was considerably less pleasant than a suit. The tailor left with his measurements and a timeline of 5 business days. Brian Thompson appeared in the doorway at 9 o'clock with a briefing on the current security structure, the week's schedule, and a sealed folder containing the past 18 months of incident and threat documentation. He set the folder on the desk. "Ms. Carter asks that you observe this week," Brian said. "No operational changes until you have a full picture. Understood. She'll meet with you." Friday at 4, he left. Malcolm opened the folder. He read it the way he read everything that mattered. Once, completely, without stopping to form opinions until he'd finished. Then he read it again with a different kind of attention. Then he made 3 pages of notes that he folded and put in his jacket pocket, because he didn't yet know who had access to his desk. He spent the rest of the morning learning the building, not the layout. He'd already pulled the floor plans the day before. He learned the building the way that actually mattered. Who held which door for whom, which elevator the cleaning crew used, how long it took the lobby guard rotation to complete a full circuit, where the loading dock cameras had gaps in their coverage. He walked every floor he had clearance for, which was all of them. He used the stairs more than the elevators. He ate lunch at his desk from a container he'd brought from home, reading the personnel files Brian had cleared him for. And that was when he first noticed Cedric Mitchell. Not dramatically, not with a moment of revelation. He noticed him the way you noticed a thing that didn't quite fit when you were paying the right kind of attention to everything. Gradually, through accumulation, the way a picture developed in a darkroom rather than appearing all at once. Cedric ran the current protective detail, 7 people, all former law enforcement, all competent in the specific and limited way that competence sometimes presented when it hadn't been tested by the right kind of pressure. They were professional. They were courteous to Malcolm, with the particular courtesy of people who hadn't decided yet what to make of him and were hedging. Cedric himself came by the office at noon on the first day. 45, fit, 12 years in Chicago PD. Before moving into private security, the ease of a man confident in the value of what he brought. He shook Malcolm's hand, the way men shook hands when measuring was the real purpose. Miss Carter speaks well of your background. She hasn't seen it work yet. Cedric smiled. Not warmly, assessingly. No, she hasn't. Malcolm spent the rest of the first week watching, not performing the new role, not asserting himself or establishing territory or demonstrating value in any of the ways that people new to positions sometimes did when they were more interested in being seen as capable than in actually being it. He attended briefings, learned schedules, walked the routes, read the threat assessments, kept his opinions inside his jacket pocket with his notes. He was looking for something specific. He found the edge of it in week 2. 3 times in 6 days, Vanessa ended up in a location where someone was waiting who shouldn't have known she'd be there. A lunch rescheduled the morning of. An alternate building exit chosen at the last moment over the primary route. A meeting room changed 2 hours before the meeting. Each event was individually explainable. Logistics shifted. Plans changed. Buildings had maintenance issues. 3 times in 6 days was a pattern. Malcolm went back through 90 days of security logs, movement records, the internal communication threads that Brian Thompson gave him access to after a quiet, direct conversation with Vanessa, in which Malcolm explained what he was looking for without explaining why. He cross-referenced. He built a list. He went through the list twice and cut it to what he could actually demonstrate versus what he was reading. What he could demonstrate fit on 1 page. Cedric Mitchell made a call every evening, between 5:45 and 6:15, from the sidewalk outside the building rather than from inside it. Duration, 6 to 8 minutes. The recipient number was registered to a consulting firm in the West Loop that, through 2 layers of corporate registration, connected to the holding company of a private equity fund, currently competing with Cole Capital for the same acquisition target, Vanessa had been quietly maneuvering toward for 4 months. That was all he had on paper. The rest was inference. The timing of those 3 location exposures, relative to Cedric's call log, the fact that Cedric had access to the rescheduled lunch before it was formally entered into the scheduling system. Inference that Malcolm trusted, because he'd spent 13 years making inferences in environments where the cost of getting them wrong was considerably higher than this. 4 days. He spent 4 days making certain. Then he put the single page on Vanessa's desk at 6 in the evening, when the floor was clear. She read it. Read it a second time. Set it face down on the desk. The office was quiet. The city spread out through the floor to silent glass in every direction. The lake a dark strip to the east going darker as the light went. She sat with the page for a long moment, without speaking, and Malcolm sat across from her, and let her have the moment, because some things needed to be absorbed before they could be responded to, and rushing that process didn't help anything. Cedric has been with me 7 years, she said finally. Her voice was level in the way that voices were level when the steadiness was being actively maintained rather than coming naturally. I know, She looked at the page again without turning it over. You're certain. I'm certain about what's on the page. The rest is inference. Your inference. Yes, she looked at the window, at the city, at something past both of them that Malcolm didn't try to name. People ask me how I built what I've built, she said, not quite to him, to the space between the desk and the glass. And I tell them it's market research and risk management and capital structure. Which is true. And it's also that I have never been wrong about a person. The pause was specific. Until apparently now. You weren't wrong about who he was when you hired him, Malcolm said. Things change people. Situations change people. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't make the original read incorrect. She looked at him. He didn't add anything. She didn't ask him to. Tomorrow morning, she said Cedric was gone by noon the next day. Vanessa handled it through HR and legal, framing it as a restructuring, keeping the terms clean and the conversation brief. No accusation, no scene. Professional to the end. The way these things were supposed to be professional. Which didn't make them hurt less on either side, but at least made them survivable. By afternoon, Malcolm had the detail. He didn't announce it, and he didn't make changes to demonstrate authority. He adjusted 3 protocols that had been creating predictable patterns in Vanessa's daily movements. He rewrote 2 standard routes. He set up a morning check-in that took 4 minutes and required everyone to be direct about what they didn't know, rather than confident about what they assumed they did. The detail adapted. People who were good at their jobs adapted. 6 weeks in, the work had found its shape, and that was when Donald Thomas, recovering in a hospital bed on the 14th floor of Northwestern Memorial, with his arm in a sling and a physical therapy schedule. He wasn't following and a great deal of time to think, made his move. He didn't come at Malcolm. He was smarter than that, or at least smart enough. He'd had the Café to teach him what happened when you came at Malcolm directly. He went for Zoe. Malcolm didn't understand how Donald had gotten the information at first. School. Pickup records were accessible through channels he hadn't thought to lock down, because locking them down would have required imagining that someone would go there. Which he hadn't imagined. Which Donald had counted on. The network produced. The school's name, the afternoon pickup time, the teacher. The call came on a Thursday at 4:15. Malcolm was already at school, standing in the pickup line in the specific way he stood in every line. Weight even, hands loose, aware of the parking lot's geometry and everyone in it without appearing to be undronal number. He answered anyway, a woman's voice, professional neutral, the kind of voice that delivered difficult information to strangers as a regular part of its working day. Mr. Hayes, I'm calling from the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. We've received a report concerning the welfare of your daughter, Zoe Hayes. And we'd like to schedule a home evaluation at your earliest convenience. The parking lot didn't change. Parents moved around him. Children came out the double doors in their winter coats, finding faces in the line. Malcolm's voice when it came was level. Within what time frame? 72 hours from this call, per standard protocol. A caseworker will follow up to confirm the appointment. He said he understood. Thanked her. Ended the call, stood in the line. Zoe came out 8 minutes later, yellow backpack, red boots, a drawing held flat in both hands, at arm's length in front of her, because she'd apparently decided it would be damaged by the backpack, and had carried it this way. For however long the school day had been. She found him and her face did the thing it always did when she found him at pickup. A specific unwinding, the day dropping off her shoulders, replaced by something easier. Daddy? Hey, bug? She fell in beside him, matching his pace, and started telling him about a bird that had landed on the outside windowsill during math. A small brown bird. It had stayed for almost 10 minutes. It had tilted its head at them. She had a theory about what it had been looking for. He listened to all of it. All 2 blocks of it said nothing about the call. That night, after Zoe was asleep, Malcolm sat at the kitchen table and thought clearly and without panic about what Donald Thomas had understood. The shoulder was a loss he couldn't recover from in any useful time frame. The lawyers would take months, and the civil suit was already in Vanessa's legal team's hands. But a child welfare investigation, a single anonymous report, a bureaucratic process, that didn't need to find anything concrete to consume time and attention, and create paper that could be used in other contexts. That was a different kind of weapon. Cheap to deploy, difficult to dismiss without engaging, and it aimed at the exact place where Malcolm had no armor. Target the thing that can't defend itself. Malcolm called Vanessa at 9:45. She answered on the second ring. He told her everything. Flat, sequential, no editorializing. When he finished, the silence on her end lasted 4 seconds, which he'd come to understand was her thinking, not her hesitating. "I know a family attorney," she said. "Cynthia Lewis. She works out of Hyde Park. 17 years in family law, and she's won cases that much larger firms turned down because winning them wasn't going to be easy enough." A pause. "I can call her tonight. I'll find my own attorney," Malcolm said. Not sharp, just clear. "This one is mine to handle, a beat. Okay, if I need resources, you know where I am. Thank you for not pushing me on it." The line held quiet for a moment. Then, "You didn't need me to push back. You needed me to hear what you said." Another pause, shorter. "It was Donald. It was Donald." Her voice didn't change in any dramatic way. It got precise. "Legal will have it by morning. The civil complaint is already in motion. This adds a dimension." A pause she didn't fill. "He went after your daughter." "Yes, people who do that." She stopped herself. Came back to the cleaner version of whatever she'd been about to say. "Legal will add it to the file." He noted what she hadn't said. He did that. Noted the edges of things. It was another habit that didn't turn off. He found Cynthia Lewis himself, the way he'd said he would. A search, 2 calls, 1 referral from the second call. He reached her on Friday morning, and she picked up on the 4th ring, which told him she was busy, but answered unknown numbers, because her clients sometimes needed to reach her from unfamiliar phones. He told her everything. She listened without interrupting, asked 4 questions at the end, each one more specific than the last. "Bring me whatever documentation you have," she said. "Everything. And come in today if you can." He went in that afternoon. Zoe at the after-school program 2 hours before pickup. Cynthia Lewis was 51, small, with reading glasses she took on and off during their conversation, with the frequency of someone who'd long since stopped being self-conscious about needing them. She read his file, the contractor license, the therapy records, the discharge papers, the letter from Mrs. Patterson about Zoe's development, and looked up at one specific place. "You've been in therapy 8 weeks? Yes. Voluntarily? Yes, before this job. Before any of this, 6 weeks before." He held her gaze. "I have a PTSD diagnosis. I wasn't treating it because I didn't have adequate coverage, and because..." He stopped, restarted. "Because I'd convinced myself I was managing it well enough, were you?" He thought about the specific texture of 2 in the morning. The door checked 3 times. The way Zoe's cry from a nightmare could have him on his feet and in her doorway before he was fully awake. Well enough to function. Not well enough to be honest about. Cynthia Lewis wrote something, then looked up. "That honesty is going to matter considerably more than you think it will." She was ready when the caseworker came. The caseworker arrived Saturday morning at 10. Her name was Patricia Johnson, and she had the look of someone who had done this job long enough to have stopped predicting outcomes before she walked through a door. Methodical. Fair. She looked at the apartment without commenting on it. The narrow kitchen, the children's drawings covering the entire refrigerator surface. The red boots lined up at the door next to Malcolm's work boots. The small and specific order of a space where 2 people had figured out how to live in it together. She spoke with Malcolm for 20 minutes. Direct questions. Direct answers. Then she asked to speak with Zoe alone. He knew it was protocol. He knew it's her protocol. He went to the hallway and stood with his back to the wall and did nothing with his hands for 11 minutes, which was the longest 11 minutes he'd been asked to get through in a long time, and he had a fairly extensive reference set for long minutes. When Patricia came back out, she made a final note, closed the folder, and looked at Malcolm for a moment before she spoke. "Your daughter told me you read to her before bed every night even. Careful. She told me you try to make eggs the way her mother used to, and they never come out right." A pause. "She told me you cried once and you thought she didn't see it." Patricia held his gaze. "She also said, and I'm recording this in the case file verbatim, That you are the safest person she knows. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Just once. Just briefly. Patricia picked up her bag. I'll be filing this report as unsubstantiated. The home environment is appropriate. Your treatment documentation is current and consistent. She paused at the door. I can't tell you who filed the original report, but the pattern of the filing, anonymous, specific personal details, timed within weeks of an active civil dispute involving the same parties, is something our department tracks. We've seen this used as a pressure tactic before. She looked at him with the specific clarity of someone telling you something they're not technically authorized to tell you. It doesn't achieve what people hope it will. After she left, Malcolm sat down on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet under the sink. Not because he was beaten. The opposite. Because he needed somewhere solid to put the weight of something before he picked it back up, and the floor was the most honest surface available. Zoe found him there 20 minutes later as she'd been drawing at the low table in the living room, absorbed in something that required her full concentration. And now she came into the kitchen and found her father sitting on the floor with his back to the cabinets and looked at him with the particular expression of a 6-year-old encountering a configuration that didn't match her existing model of how adults occupied spaces. She sat down next to him, not asking, just sat, shoulder against his arm, her small weight settling into the space beside him like it belonged there. Did the lady say something bad? The lady said something good. She considered this. Then, why are you on the floor? He thought about how to answer that in a way that was true. Because sometimes when something good happens after something hard, you need a minute to feel both of them before you stand back up. She seemed to find this reasonable. She leaned her head against his arm. Daddy? Yeah. Can we have the eggs tonight? The not like mommy ones? Something shifted in his chest. Not the cracking open feeling from the cafe. Something different, quieter, more like a door opening than a wall giving way. The feeling of being known. Of being in a place where your imperfections were part of the furniture rather than things you were managing against. Yeah, Bug, he said. We can have the eggs. She stayed on the floor beside him for a while longer, drawing invisible shapes on the linoleum with her finger, content in the simple way that children were content when the person they needed most was within arm's reach. She wasn't waiting for him to be okay. She was just there while he got there, which was better. He always came back. That was the thing Donald Thomas had gotten wrong, aiming at Zoe to reach Malcolm. He'd found the right target and drawn the wrong conclusion about what that target meant. He'd seen a vulnerability and mistaken it for a weakness. He'd aimed at the wound without understanding that some wounds were structural. That the thing most likely to break you was sometimes the exact thing that made you impossible to break because you'd spent every day for 2 years making sure it was protected. Renee had told him something once, early in their marriage, when he'd come back from somewhere he couldn't talk about and couldn't quite leave behind. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, not sleeping, not doing anything useful, just sitting with the weight of it. She'd sat down across from him, hadn't asked, just been there. And, after a while she'd said, the point isn't to have no soft places. The point is to know what they're for. He'd been thinking about those words for 2 years. Sitting on the kitchen floor with Zoe drawing shapes on the linoleum beside him, he thought he was finally starting to understand them in the way that understanding happened after you'd lived something rather than heard it. He got up, washed his hands, got the eggs out of the refrigerator. Zoe climbed up onto the counter stool and supervised with the seriousness she brought to things she considered her domain, which increasingly included any activity in the kitchen she'd been present for more than twice. She corrected his heat level. He turned it down without argument because she was, as it happened, correct. He made the eggs. They ate dinner. They weren't like Renee's eggs. They never would be. Renee had put something in them that he'd never identified and had never thought to ask about when he could have, and now the window for asking was closed. But these were their eggs, his and Zoe's, made the same wrong way they'd been made 100 times in this narrow kitchen, in the specific rhythm of 2 people who'd had to figure out a life together from scratch and had done it imperfectly and completely. Outside, Chicago was being Chicago. The traffic, the distant sound of the train, the particular pressure of a city full of people working through their own complications. Inside the narrow kitchen, with the fixed windowsill and the slow radiator, it was just the two of them. That was the whole world. For now, that was more than enough. 3 weeks after Patricia Johnson closed her file, the civil case moved, not because of anything dramatic, because Donald Thomas's attorney called Cynthia Lewis and used the specific tone of an attorney who had done the math on going to trial, and found it significantly less favorable than it had been 3 weeks earlier. The conversation was professional and brief, and resulted in a scheduled mediation session that both sides understood was a formality, preceding a number that would be agreed upon. Cynthia called Malcolm on a Tuesday evening. He was helping Zoe with a drawing project that involved an ambitious amount of blue. Mediation is set for the 15th, she said. I expect we'll have a number by end of day. My read is they want this behind them. What changed? A few things. She paused with the precision of someone who had decided how much to say. The Tribune reached out to me this week. A reporter named Monica Reed. She's been working on a piece about the Café incident, and she found the child services connection. Another pause. I gave her Patricia Johnson's filed report. It's public record. Malcolm was quiet. She's thorough, Cynthia said. And she's been at it for 4 weeks, which means whatever she publishes is going to be documented well enough to hold. Donald's team knows it's coming. A beat. That changes the math on going to trial. He thanked her, set the phone down. Zoe looked up from the blue situation. Was that about the bad man? He looked at his daughter. Sort of. Is it done? He thought about that. Almost. She accepted this and returned to the blue, which had developed into something that might have been an ocean or might have been a sky. He'd learned not to ask until she was finished, because the question sometimes changed what it became. The Tribune piece ran that Thursday. Monica Reed had spent 4 weeks building it carefully, which showed in how it held together. The Café incident documented through witness accounts, and the camera footage the Café had posted to their social media 2 months prior. Then the Child Services report traced back through filing patterns to Donald Thomas through the same LLC paper trail Malcolm had identified the morning he'd first found it. The piece didn't editorialize. It didn't need to. The facts, arranged in order, made the argument without assistance. The Café footage, which had been circulating intermittently on social media since the Café posted it, suddenly had context it hadn't had before. And with context, it spread differently. Not because of Malcolm, because of Zoe. 43 seconds. The last 20 before Donald's hands made contact, the 4 seconds after, and then a 6-year-old with her eyes closed, counting upward in a room of complete silence, while her father stood in the center of 3 men on the floor and waited to see if it was over. 7, 9, 8, 10. That was the part people couldn't leave alone. Not the technique, not the speed. The sound of a child trusting without reservation, in a situation she didn't have the framework to understand, because her father had asked her to. By Friday, the Tribune piece had been picked up by 4 national outlets. By the following Monday, Donald's attorney had called Cynthia Lewis to confirm the mediation would proceed as scheduled, and had suggested, unprompted, that their client was prepared to be reasonable. Apex Financial terminated Donald's contract the same week, with a clause preventing him from discussing the terms. The regulatory inquiry that compliance had been slow-walking for 8 months suddenly had institutional urgency behind it, for reasons that had nothing to do with Vanessa Carter, and everything to do with what the Tribune piece had prompted. 3 different journalists to start looking into. Gary Young and Terry Coleman had taken plea arrangements months earlier. Assault, battery, no contest, and had receded into the particular obscurity of people who'd misjudged a room and paid the price for it without any drama. Donald Thomas was not destroyed by Vanessa Carter. He was not undone by Malcolm Hayes. He was undone by a 43-second video of a 6-year-old counting to 10, and by the paper trail of a man who had kept using the same instruments of pressure past the point where anyone with better judgment would have stopped. The settlement was signed on a Friday afternoon in November, 11 months after a Tuesday morning in a café on Michigan Avenue. Cynthia Lewis called Malcolm while he was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and the afternoon light coming in at the low flat angle of late autumn through a window he had fixed himself, with caulk from the third trip to the hardware store, because he'd bought the wrong kind twice before getting it right. It didn't seem like much, fixing a window. It was. "It's done," Cynthia said, and her voice carried the specific satisfaction of someone who had won something that had required winning properly. "Signed this morning. You'll have the funds within 10 business days," he thanked her. Sat with the news for a few minutes, doing nothing with it except letting it be real. Then he called Vanessa's cell. Not the office line, the cell. And when she picked up, he said, "It's done." A pause. "The settlement? Signed this morning." A longer pause. "How do you feel?" He thought about that. An honest question deserved an honest answer, and she'd asked it as one. Like something I've been holding for almost a year, just put itself down somewhere I didn't have to carry it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, simply, "Go pick up your daughter." He did. Zoe came out of school with a piece of paper held flat in both hands at arm's length, the same way she'd carried the drawing on the Thursday. When the call had come in about the child services investigation, he'd learned to recognize the posture. It meant she'd made something she considered finished and was protecting it accordingly. She handed it to him at the car without ceremony, then waited. He unrolled it carefully. Watercolor. She'd started the program at the Community Arts Center 4 weeks ago, the Saturday sessions Mrs. Patterson had told him about. A city skyline, Chicago, the lake visible behind the buildings, and in the foreground 2 figures. One tall, one small in a yellow coat, standing at the water's edge with their backs to the viewer, facing the city. "It's us," Zoe said. Unnecessary. Obvious. She said it anyway. He looked at the painting for a long time. "It's really good. Bug, I know. Factual, not boastful. Miss Peterson said it's the strongest thing I've done." Miss Peterson is right. Zoe climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in with focused attention. "Then, can we give it to someone?" He looked at the painting. "Who did you have in mind?" She thought about it with her whole face. "Vanessa. She said her office's walls were boring. I think she meant she didn't have good things on them yet." He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "She told you that?" "She said it when I was there last week. When you were in the meeting." A pause. She looked at the walls when she said it. Like she was checking, he looked at the painting one more time. The 2 figures at the water's edge, facing toward what was in front of them rather than what was behind. "Okay," he said. "We'll frame it first." He drove home through the early dark of November. Zoe, narrating her theory about why the lake looked different colors at different times of day. Malcolm listening to all of it. The settlement paperwork somewhere in his email, and the painting rolled carefully in its cardboard tube on the seat beside him. The city moved past the windows. His city, now, not the operational abstraction of it, not the geography of threat assessment and exit routes and the geometry of what could go wrong. Just Chicago. Just home. Whatever came next, it was from here. That was different from everything that had come before. That was, he was beginning to understand, entirely the point. 6 months was enough time to become someone new, not all the way down. Not in the places that held the original shape of a person, regardless of what accumulated on top of them. But in the visible ways, the ones that other people read first and built their assumptions from. Malcolm Hayes had changed enough that the man in the worn flannel shirt from a Tuesday morning in November would have required a second look to place in the same body as the one standing now in the lobby of the Aldworth Center on a Friday evening, wearing a charcoal suit that had been made for him specifically and fit the way things fit. Someone who understood their craft had done the measuring. Same eyes, though same way of standing. Back to the nearest solid surface, right side free, hands loose at his sides. Attention moving through the room in the systematic, unhurried circuit that had been trained into him below the level of choice and had never stopped running, regardless of what he was wearing or what the room was supposed to be about. Some things didn't change. Some things weren't supposed to. The Aldworth was Chicago's oldest private event venue. 4 floors of limestone and original hardwood that had absorbed enough significant evenings over enough decades to have developed its own atmosphere, the specific gravity of a building that knew it mattered and had stopped needing to prove it. Tonight it was hosting the mayor's annual charitable foundation gala. 300 guests, 16 corporate sponsors, a guest list that functioned as a directory of everyone in this city who had decided at some point in their careers that being in the same room as everyone else who'd made the same decision was worth the cost of the ticket. Malcolm had been here since 4 in the afternoon. He'd walked the floor twice before the catering staff arrived and once after, at which point the room had changed in the specific ways that rooms changed when they began to fill with furniture, and people whose job was to move through them. He knew the exits 4, with a 5th service exit off the east corridor, that the venue's floor plan listed as a fire door, but that the catering crew had been propping open with a rubber wedge since 6 o'clock for airflow. He knew the camera positions and their angles. He knew which tables sat in the sound shadow of the ventilation columns and which were fully exposed to the room. He knew the 3 service entrances, the loading dock rotation, and the fact that the stairwell light on the 2nd floor east had a 3-second delay after the switch was thrown. The facilities manager had apologized for it at 4:15 and promised it would be fixed before guests arrived. It had not been fixed. Malcolm had noted that too, and had positioned one of his team members near that stairwell for the duration of the evening, with instructions that required no explanation to a professional. Brian Thompson had sent the confirmed guest list through at 2 o'clock. Malcolm read it the way he read everything that required his full attention. Once, completely, without forming opinions until the reading was finished. Then a second time with a different quality of focus. 312 names. He knew 40 of them from research conducted over the previous 6 months. Another dozen from direct encounters within Vanessa's professional orbit. The remainder he'd run against the threat matrix his team updated every Monday morning. One name had caught, not on the official guest list. On the vendor registration, the photography roster specifically, which routed through the venue's events coordinator, rather than through CoCapital's planning team, and therefore hadn't crossed Malcolm's desk through the normal channel. He'd requested it separately, as he'd requested every supplementary document the venue generated for the evening because gaps in information were where things happened. Scott Hill, independent photographer, contracted by the Aldworth for event coverage. Scott Hill's website had been registered 14 months ago. The portfolio was functional but thin, the kind of thin that came from assembling rather than accumulating. His social presence had the careful consistency of something constructed to appear organic, posts at regular intervals, appropriate image variety, nothing that predated the website registration by more than a few weeks. Real careers had inconsistency built into them. They had the gaps and bursts of people who'd been doing something before they thought to document it. Malcolm had pulled the business registration next. Scott Hill Photography LLC had received one significant payment in the past quarter, 14 days prior, from a holding company registered in Delaware. 2 layers of corporate registration later, that holding company connected to the investment group currently making competing offers on the Hartwell Media acquisition. The deal. Vanessa had been working for 8 months, the one positioned to close within 3 weeks. The one that 3 separate parties had clear financial motivation to see fail or derail before final signature, not a physical threat. Something more considered than that. A photographer with a purpose, to capture something usable, something that could live in an inbox or a board presentation, or on a website as evidence that Vanessa Carter was the kind of reputational risk that careful investors didn't take, an image that implied what the moment didn't actually contain. A story told through framing rather than fabrication. This was how it worked at the level Vanessa operated. Not confrontation, not the blunt instruments that Donald Thomas had reached for. Perception, deployed with precision. Narrative constructed from real elements arranged to suggest something false. Malcolm had called Brian Thompson at 2:45 and made one change to the evening's itinerary. Vanessa's arrival entrance switched from the main to the north side, reason logged as vehicle logistics. Routine. Brian confirmed without questions. That was part of what made Brian Thompson indispensable. He understood that some confirmations were the whole job. Malcolm hadn't told Vanessa yet, not concealment. A decision about sequencing. She had 3 conversations that needed her complete and undivided presence tonight. The mayor, regarding a zoning matter that Coal Capital's community development arm had been working toward for 5 months. The chair of the Hartwell board, here socially, whose read of the room would inform how the final weeks of the acquisition played out. And Angela Young, who ran the charitable foundation hosting tonight's event and whose public endorsement of Coal Capital's community investment program was worth more in certain circles than any press release legal could draft. He didn't want her carrying the Scott Hill problem into any of those conversations. He wanted her fully present for each of them, so he carried it. That was the job. Not the part that was visible. The part that happened in the hours before she arrived, in the adjustments nobody announced, in the small redirections that ensured nothing bad happened, and therefore nothing needed to be explained afterward. She arrived at 7:10 in a car Malcolm had rerouted without announcing the rerouting. Dark structured dress, minimal jewelry, the same composed attention she brought into every room she'd decided to enter. She came through the north entrance, and Malcolm fell in beside her without ceremony, and she glanced at him once, with the question already formed in her expression, and he gave her the slight single headshake that they'd developed over months to mean, not now, handled, nothing you need to manage tonight. She read it exactly and let it go. That was also the job. The shorthand that took time to build and couldn't be faked. Mayor's table is first, she said, moving through the venue with the ease of someone who'd been the most prepared person in too many rooms to be impressed by the room itself. Angela Young will be at the bar by 8. She gets there early and stays at the edge. I need 30 minutes with her before the Hartwell conversation. Understood. If Victor Bryant tries to corner me about the West Side development, he won't reach you. She glanced sideways, almost a smile. You've been in a room with Victor Bryant exactly twice. I've read his file 4 times. He telegraphs his approach. It's the same every time. The almost smile completed itself. Small, real, the smile she didn't perform for rooms. Then she turned toward the main hall and it packed itself away, and Vanessa Carter, CEO of Coal Capital Group, walked into the gala and became the version of herself that 300 people in this room had been told to expect. Malcolm stayed at the perimeter. He watched Scott Hill for the first 90 minutes. The photographer moved through the room the way event photographers moved. Circulating, capturing, maintaining the ambient invisibility of someone whose job made them furniture. But his camera angle was wrong. Not building a record of the evening, not documenting the event in the comprehensive way that venues and foundations expected from their hired photographers. Tracking, his lens kept finding angles that would place Vanessa in adjacency with guests she wasn't actually engaged with. The kind of adjacency that could imply proximity and therefore association in a still image stripped of the context that would make the implication false. Malcolm shifted Vanessa twice. The first time, he intercepted a server carrying a specific drink order to the table near Scott Hill's current position and redirected the delivery to where Vanessa was actually standing, which moved the natural flow of her conversation 3 steps, left and out of the angle Scott was working. The second time, Scott had found an angle that would have placed Vanessa in the same frame as a man whose name appeared in 3 active regulatory inquiries. Not someone she'd spoken to, not someone who'd approached her, simply someone whose physical proximity the camera could use. Malcolm stepped into the frame, just stood there, in the shot, looking at his phone with the expression of a man checking something routine. Boring, unhelpful to any narrative, impossible to cut around without removing the entire setup. Scott lowered the camera, looked at what he had on the screen, looked up, and found Malcolm standing in the wrong place again. Their eyes met across the room. Malcolm held it for 3 seconds. Even. Unremarkable. Then he looked away, back to his sweep of the room, as though the exchange had been incidental. Scott Hill did not attempt a third angle. At 9:42, he packed his equipment with the deliberate efficiency of someone who'd revised their plan, and arrived at the conclusion that the evening had nothing left to offer. He left through the service exit, which Malcolm had expected because it was the least visible option. And Scott Hill had demonstrated throughout the evening that he understood visibility. Malcolm watched him go, turned back to the room, done. No confrontation, no scene, no moment that anyone present would remember or report. A photographer who'd arrived with a purpose, and was leaving with generic crowd shots and an invoice that his employer would find deeply unsatisfying. The threat had been neutralized in the way Malcolm preferred threats to be neutralized, so cleanly that it would take the people who'd deployed it some time to confirm it had even been attempted. Vanessa's 3 conversations went the way they needed to go. Angela Young laughed twice during their exchange near the east windows, 2 more times than she typically laughed at industry events, according to the background notes Malcolm had read. When she left to find her husband, she touched Vanessa's arm briefly. The touch of someone who had made a decision about trust and was marking it without ceremony. The mayor confirmed the zoning variance in a 40-second conversation that had been 5 months in preparation. The Hartwell board chair said something low and specific over dessert that made Vanessa nod once, with the particular satisfaction of a number finally confirmed. 3 for 3. Good night. On the ride back, the city moved past the tinted glass, and Vanessa waited until they'd cleared the venue district, and the accumulated noise of the evening had settled before she asked. "What happened tonight that I don't know about?" He told her. "All of it." Scott Hill. The LLC trail, the registration connection to the Hartwell competing bid, the 3 positional adjustments, the service exit departure at 9:42. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment, processing, not hesitating, the distinction he'd learned to read accurately over months. "You made 3 changes to my movements tonight without telling me." "Yes. And you didn't brief me beforehand because you had 3 conversations that required your complete attention." The threat was mine to manage. Carrying it into those conversations would have split your focus for no gain, because there was nothing you needed to do differently once I'd identified it. The car moved through a long curve. "That's a significant unilateral decision," she said. Not sharp. Careful, the voice of someone drawing a boundary thoughtfully rather than reactively. "I know, most people in your position would have briefed me, protected themselves, made sure I knew they'd handled something." He held her gaze. "You hired me to handle things, not to narrate the handling while it's happening." A pause that had weight to it. "Going forward," she said. "Same night. After. Not during, but before I sleep." She said it like someone who'd surprised herself slightly by the concession and had decided to stay with it anyway. He nodded. She looked out the window. Then, Victor Bryant left at 9:15. "Didn't approach you, Angela Young." She touched your arm when she said goodbye. Vanessa turned back to him. "You saw that." "I see everything." A brief silence. Then, in a different register than anything she used in professional contexts. "Thank you. For tonight, not the functional thanks. The other kind, that cost something to say." He didn't deflect it. "You're welcome." The Hartwell deal closed on a Wednesday in late November, 8 months, and 4 competing bids after Vanessa had first identified the acquisition target and begun the quiet, methodical work of positioning Cole Capital as the inevitable outcome. Malcolm was in the building for the closing. Not in the room, that wasn't his function, but present on the floor, available, doing what he always did in spaces where something significant was happening. Watching the edges. When Vanessa came out of the conference room at 2:17 in the afternoon, she looked the way she looked when something that had required sustained effort was finally complete. Not exhilarated, not relieved exactly, but settled. A person returning to their own center of gravity after a long time operating away from it. She saw Malcolm at the end of the corridor and walked toward him and said nothing for a moment. Then, "It's done, I know," he said. Brian texted. She almost smiled. Of course he did. They rode the elevator down together in the comfortable quiet they'd developed over months. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say. The silence of people who'd stopped needing to fill space between thoughts. The roasted bean footage had been running on social media in cycles since the Café posted it the previous spring, surfacing and receding with the rhythm of things that found new audiences periodically. After Monica Reed's Tribune piece connected the Child Services report to Donald Thomas through the LLC paper trail, the footage had found its largest and most sustained audience yet. Not because of the 4 seconds of what Malcolm had done, because of Zoe counting 43 seconds. 7, 8, 9, 10. A 6-year-old with her eyes closed, voice barely above a whisper, trusting in a room where the adults around her had comprehensively failed to behave like adults. That was the part that didn't let people go. Donald Thomas had been terminated by Apex Financial within 2 weeks of the Tribune piece, with a separation agreement that prevented discussion of terms. The regulatory inquiry that compliance had been managing at low priority for 8 months reached its conclusion in December, accelerated by the institutional scrutiny that Reed's reporting had generated. 3 journalists had begun pulling threads that the piece had left visible, and what they'd found had added dimensions to the inquiry that its original scope hadn't anticipated. Gary Young and Terry Coleman had taken their plea arrangements and disappeared into the specific quiet of people who'd made a bad bet and lived with the consequence of it without fanfare. Donald Thomas had not been undone by Vanessa Carter's resources or Malcolm's capability. He'd been undone by a 43-second video that showed exactly who he was when he thought he was the most powerful person in the room, and by his own decision to use a child welfare system as a personal instrument of pressure, and by Monica Reed spending 4 weeks building a piece careful enough to hold when it mattered. None of it required Malcolm to do anything. None of it required Vanessa to deploy anything. It just required the truth to be documented and placed where people could see it. Sometimes that was sufficient. Malcolm thought about that on the drive home on the night the Hartwell deal closed, about the economy of it, about how much energy Donald Thomas had spent constructing weapons that turned out to be unnecessary, because the thing that actually ended him was the record of what he'd already done, arranged in the order it had happened, with no editorializing required. Zoe was asleep when he got home. He stood in her doorway for a moment, the way he always stood in her doorway, checking the specific quality of her sleep, the easy, settled weight of it. Then he went to the kitchen, made tea he didn't particularly want, and sat at the table in the specific good quiet of a house where everything was fine. He stayed there for a while, just letting it be. The painting went up on a Thursday. Zoe had decided, with the finality that characterized her most significant decisions, that Vanessa's office walls needed something real on them. She'd said this to Malcolm on the drive home from art class 3 weeks earlier, describing Vanessa's office walls with the critical specificity of a 6-and-a-half-year-old, who had decided that boring walls were a solvable problem, and that she was in a position to solve them. He'd had the watercolor framed. Simple frame, good matte, the kind that let the painting speak without competing with it. Zoe had supervised the selection process with focused authority. It went up on the east wall of Vanessa's office, the wall that caught the afternoon light best, which Malcolm had determined before mentioning the painting to anyone. Brian Thompson hung it with a level and 2 anchors and stepped back. Vanessa looked at it for a long moment. The city, the lake going dark behind the buildings, the 2 figures at the water's edge facing forward, one tall, one small in a yellow coat. She painted this 3 weeks ago, Malcolm said. It's from the Saturday program. She's 6. 6-and-a-half, a pause. She'll correct you if you forget the half. Vanessa looked at the painting for another moment, and something in her expression was unguarded, in a way that her expressions in most professional contexts weren't. Not performed openness, actual openness. The kind that happened when something arrived that a person didn't have a prepared response for. No one has ever given me something they made. She said it with the specific quality of a realization that was completing itself as it was being spoken. In 11 years in this business, people have given me things. Good things, expensive things, but not. She stopped, looked at the painting again. Not something they made. He didn't have a response to that. Some things didn't need responding to. They needed to be received. Zoe, who had been standing at Vanessa's desk with a collection of colored pens she'd discovered in the top drawer, and was arranging by color family with professional concentration, looked up. Vanessa? Yes? Pink or green? Vanessa turned. For what? The new playground at my school. She said a green pen precisely parallel to a blue one. Daddy said Coal Capital is paying for it. She delivered this as established fact, unconcerned with whether it was supposed to be established. Malcolm had not told Zoe this. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked back at him with the brief expression of a woman whose careful anonymity had been undone by someone who had not yet learned that some things weren't supposed to be known. How did she? I have no idea, Malcolm said, which was true. Vanessa looked at Zoe. Green matches the school's existing color scheme. It's the coherent choice. Zoe placed a red pen at a precise angle to the others. Pink is more fun, and fun is the whole point of a playground. Green is for hallways, the architectural integration. Pink, a beat. Vanessa looked at Malcolm. He raised one hand in the small gesture that communicated, with complete clarity and zero ambiguity, that he was not available to be recruited into this particular negotiation, and wished them both well with it. I'll think about it, Vanessa said. Zoe resumed her pen arrangement. That means pink. The playground went in the following April. Pink. The installation company sent a photo to Brian Thompson's email, which Brian forwarded to Malcolm with no comment, which was exactly the right amount of comment. Nobody announced it. Zoe mentioned it once at dinner, factually, and then moved on to a detailed account of a disagreement she'd had with a classmate about whether horses could swim, which turned out to be a more complex question than it initially appeared. Malcolm listened to all of it. That was a Saturday in December. On Sunday morning, before Zoe was awake, he went to Oakwood Cemetery alone. He went early, in the first gray of a December morning, when the ground was hard and the bare trees stood against a sky the flat white of clouds that hadn't decided yet what they intended to do. He brought nothing. No flowers, no objects to leave. Just himself in his good coat, standing at the stone where Renee's name was. He talked to her the way he'd been talking to her for 2 years. Not quite aloud, not quite interior. Somewhere in the space between, that didn't have a formal category. He told her about Zoe. About the watercolor, the Saturday program, the way Miss Peterson had told him 2 weeks ago. That Zoe had an instinct for composition that didn't come from instruction. That it was in how she saw, which either you had or you didn't, and Zoe had it. He told her about the red boots, which Zoe had finally retired in favor of a pair of silver ones, though the red ones remained in the closet because retirement and disposal were apparently 2 different things. He told her about the work, the 47th floor, the suit that fit, the particular satisfaction of doing something he was genuinely good at in a context where it mattered. And then he told her about Vanessa, not apologetically, without explanation or justification, just as a fact. A person who had been in a corner booth on a Tuesday morning and had stood up when she didn't have to, and who had turned out to be someone Malcolm could be honest with, which was a category he hadn't expected to find again and hadn't been looking for. The trees stood in the cold without comment. He stood there a while longer. Let the December air do what December air did. Then he said quietly, to the stone and the sky and the bare December trees and whatever else might have been listening, I think you'd have liked her. She'd have made you laugh. She has a very specific way of being right about things that would have driven you crazy and that you'd have respected. A pause. She's not you. Nobody is you, but she's real. And real turned out to be what I needed to find. He drove home, made breakfast, woke Zoe, who emerged from sleep with the gradually increasing consciousness of someone surfacing from considerable depth, watched her eat with the focused dedication she brought to any meal she decided was worth her full attention. She told him about a dream involving a horse that was very good at long division, which had now appeared 4 times and seemed to be developing into something. He drove her to art class, picked her up, let her explain, at some length, why burnt sienna was a fundamentally underappreciated color that deserved more credit than it received from people who hadn't worked with it seriously. He agreed, unreservedly. Friday evening came the way. Friday evenings came when the week had been long and the work had been real, with the specific relief reef of a thing that had required sustained attention finally releasing it. The 47th floor emptied in stages. The detail signed off at 7. Brian Thompson left at 7:20, pausing in the doorway of Malcolm's office to confirm the Monday schedule with the thoroughness that characterized everything Brian did, and then departing without requiring anything further. The cleaning crew moved through and on. Malcolm did his final pass. The last check, the one he didn't skip on quiet evenings any more than on busy ones. Because the quiet evenings were the ones where the habit mattered most. He checked the stairwells, the elevator bank, the service corridor, the roof access panel, whose latch had been stiff since October, and that he'd flagged twice in writing without result. He was coming back down the 47th floor corridor when he saw the light under Vanessa's office door. He knocked once. "Come in." She was at her desk but not working. The laptop was closed. She had a glass of water, and the particular stillness of someone who had arrived at the end of something significant and was taking a moment before the next thing began. The painting was on the wall behind her, catching the last of the city light through the windows. The skyline outside was fully lit now, Chicago in full Friday evening operation. The lake invisible in the dark to the east. He went to the chair across from the desk, the one he'd sat in months ago, the evening he'd put the single page about Cedric Mitchell on the surface between them, and waited. "The Hartwell closing dinner was Wednesday," she said. "I know. I was in the building. The board presentation was Thursday. Also in the building." She looked at him. Something in her expression had the quality of a person who had been thinking about something for a while and had decided tonight was when they were going to say it. "I've been doing this for 11 years. Building this company, making acquisitions, managing what it requires to operate at this level." She looked at the desk for a moment. "And in 11 years there has been no one, not on the legal team, not in finance, not on the board, whose judgment I trusted without needing to verify it separately afterward." A pause. "I verified everything. Not because I doubted people, because I'd learned that I had to, because I'd been wrong enough times that verification became structural." He waited. "You made 3 significant operational decisions in the past month without briefing me in advance," she said. "The gala, the entrance change, the sightline adjustment during the Hartwell preliminary. All 3 were correct." She held his gaze. "I didn't verify them. I didn't feel the need to. And I've been sitting here since 6 o'clock trying to work out whether that represents a problem." "Is it?" he asked. She considered it. "No, which is the thing I've been sitting here with." He understood what it cost to say that, not the words themselves. The acknowledgement underneath them, that she had extended something, and it had held, and she wasn't sure yet what to do with evidence that she'd been right to extend it. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited, that first morning. In the car, he kept his voice level and even. "You offered me the job, and I didn't take it on the spot. Not because of the terms. Because I couldn't figure out your reason for helping me." He paused. "People don't do what you did in that cafe without a reason. They don't walk to the center of something volatile and put themselves on record for a stranger. I've spent 13 years in environments where people's reasons were the most important information in the room. I needed to know yours. I told you my reason. You told me the professional reason." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking for the real one." A long pause. She looked at the painting. The 2 figures at the water, facing the city, facing what was in front of them. "My father," she said. Her voice had a different texture than it had in any professional context he'd heard it in. Not broken, not emotional in the performed sense, just carrying something real in it. "He was a man who looked like you did that morning, not the military part. The other part, a man who worked with his hands. Who had learned, at some point early enough that he couldn't remember learning it, that the world responded better to him when he kept himself small. When he didn't take up more space than he was clearly permitted." She stopped. Started again. "He died when I was 26. Heart attack. He was 52 years old, and he had been careful his entire life. And in his entire life, no one who was in a position to do something for him ever did." She looked at Malcolm directly. "I was in a position. I had been watching you for 20 minutes, and I knew exactly what I was looking at." A pause that was simple and clean. "So I did." The room held the quiet of a city that was never fully quiet. Outside, Chicago ran through its Friday night. The traffic and the wind off the lake, and the low, constant hum of a place with 3 million people working through their own versions of the week's accumulated weight. Malcolm sat with what she'd said and let it mean what it meant, without adding to it or subtracting from it. Your father would have found that café extremely overpriced, he said. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as a smile but was more valuable because it was less available. He would have had opinions about the oat milk specifically. A pause. Hugh, you don't know that. He liked men who showed up and didn't need anyone to notice. She held his gaze with the steadiness she brought to things she decided were true. He said they were the rarest kind of person. Malcolm looked at the painting. Zoe had painted them from behind, facing the city, facing the lake, facing the open, undetermined space of what came next, rather than the documented space of what had already happened. He didn't know if a 6.5-year-old, who'd been taking watercolor classes for 8 weeks, had made that compositional choice consciously. He suspected she had, in the way children sometimes did things consciously that they couldn't have articulated if asked. The point wasn't where they'd been. The point was the direction they were facing. Zoe has a winter show next Friday, he said. The arts program does a combined exhibition at the end of the fall session. Drawings, some music. 28 kids, Vanessa looked at him. She's in it? She has 3 pieces in the show. He paused. She asked if you were coming. A beat, she asked. Specifically? She said. And I'm quoting without editorializing, that you had to come because she needed someone there who understood about colors. She was very clear that understanding about colors was the qualification. Vanessa looked at him across the desk, across the months, across the distance between a Tuesday morning in a café, where she'd made a decision that cost her nothing and changed more than she'd anticipated, and this Friday evening, 11 months later, where they were both different in the ways that mattered, and unchanged in the ways that mattered more. The expression on her face was not one she used professionally. It was older than that, and quieter. The kind that didn't have a boardroom application and wasn't looking for one. What time? She asked. 6:30. The Community Arts Center on Halstead. I'll be there. He nodded, stood up. She watched him move toward the door. The ease of it, the quality of presence that had been there on the Tuesday morning when he'd chosen the booth with the wall at his back, and that had not changed in any of the rooms and months and situations. Since, Malcolm, he stopped. She looked at him from the desk, from behind the painting on the wall, from inside the Friday night city that continued its operations 47 floors below, without concern for what was being set up here. What you did in that café, the waiting, the 3 times you chose not to respond when you had every reason to. The way you kept your daughter close the entire time, a pause that was careful and considered. I've thought about it more than I'd have expected to, about what it requires to hold that much capability and choose, deliberately, not to use it until the last possible moment. He stood still. Most people think strength is about what you're able to do, she said. I've spent 11 years watching people who defined themselves by what they could do. How much they could acquire, how hard they could push, how much they could make other people feel the weight of them. She held his gaze. What you showed in that café is different. It's what you choose not to do, until you have to. And then stopping the exact moment you don't have to anymore. A pause. I don't know another word for that except discipline, and I have never seen it the way I saw it that morning. He stood with that for a moment, let it land where it landed. Then, I'll have the car at 7:15 Wednesday for the board follow-up. 7:15. Good night, Vanessa. Good night. He walked out. The corridor was quiet and clean, and the elevator arrived immediately, which was the kind of small, functional grace that felt appropriate to the evening. He rode it down alone, watching the floor numbers decrease, with the steady patience of things that moved at their own pace, regardless of what was happening around them. The lobby doors opened, and he walked through them into December, cold, clear, the wind off the lake from the east, carrying the smell of deep water and the particular clean cold of open space. He stood on the sidewalk, not calculating anything, not running any assessment, just standing in the cold air of a Friday night in December, 11 months from a Tuesday morning when the rain came sideways, and his daughter wanted the biggest muffin in the case, and a man in an expensive suit made the specific and consequential error of deciding that a flannel shirt was enough information to build a conclusion from. 11 months since a woman in a beige trench coat set down her coffee cup and stood up. He thought about what Renee had said about soft places, about knowing what they were for. He thought he understood it now, in the way that understanding arrived after you'd lived in something all the way through, rather than heard it described. The soft places weren't vulnerabilities. They were the structure. Remove them and what remained wasn't stronger. It was just emptier, and empty things broke differently and worse. He thought about a 6.5-year-old who painted cityscapes and had strong opinions about Senna, and had given away the best thing she'd made because she'd looked at someone's empty walls and decided that was a problem she could solve. Mr. David Cole. He thought about a woman who had spent 11 years verifying everything and had spent a Friday evening sitting in her office with the lights on, working out whether it was a problem that she hadn't verified something, deciding it wasn't. The December wind moved through the street and Malcolm Hayes turned up his collar and walked toward the parking structure at the steady, unhurried pace of a man who had somewhere to be and enough time to get there and no need to perform the having of either. Present, watching reality, which was all it had ever taken, which turned out, in the end, to be more than enough.